Imagine a dynasty so obsessed with keeping its bloodline pure that it slowly destroyed itself. For centuries, they married cousin to cousin, uncle to niece, weaving a legacy of power built on madness. And on a stormy night, in a palace drenched with fear, their final heir was born, a living symbol of their downfall. This is the tragic rise and fall of House Drenloch, and the terrifying truth of what happens when power and purity become one. Section 1. The corridors of the obsidian palace in Valen were heavy with silence, broken only by the occasional hiss of torches against the damp, summer air. Outside, the city of Valen simmered under a merciless sun, but inside these ancient walls, the heat felt suffocating, as though the very stones were holding their breath. Lady servants moved quickly and silently, their slippers whispering over marble floors polished so smooth they reflected the torchlight like pools of dark water. The palace was tense, every person inside aware of the single event unfolding behind a pair of towering ironwood doors. From beyond those doors came the guttural cries of a woman in violent labor. The voice was high, broken, nearly feral with pain. "Push, your majesty! Push!" urged the midwife, her own voice trembling. The queen screamed again, a raw sound that echoed through the vaulted ceilings and made even the hardened guards outside shift uneasily. This was no ordinary birth. Everyone in the palace, from the lowest scullery maid to the High Chancellor himself, understood that this was a moment of reckoning, the culmination of centuries of deliberate, ruthless choices by the rulers of the Empire of Drenloch. Choices that had chained generations to a single, terrifying obsession, to preserve the royal bloodline at any cost. The woman writhing in agony behind those doors was Queen Serenya Drenloch, barely 19, her face drenched in sweat and tears. She was the niece and the wife of King Aratha IV, who even now paced the hallway outside like a caged beast. Aratha was a man of 51 winters, his once golden hair gone to gray, his heavy shoulders bent with years of ruling and inbreeding. His lower jaw jutted forward grotesquely, his speech thick and wet, a visible mark of the Drenloch curse. He paused to glare at the terrified courtiers gathered along the walls. "If the child dies," he growled, his words slurred but understandable, "you will all answer to me. Every last one of you." The courtiers bowed their heads so low their foreheads nearly touched the floor. Inside the birthing chamber, Serenya clutched the sheets so tightly her fingernails tore through the fabric. Blood stained the linens, the coppery smell mingling with the choking incense that hung in the air. "Too much blood," whispered one of the attendants, her voice almost inaudible. "She won't survive this." The midwife silenced her with a glare. "The queen must live. The empire cannot afford another dead heir." But deep down, even the midwife knew the truth. This birth was not simply dangerous, it was unnatural. For nearly 2 centuries, the Drenloch rulers had married their own kin, generation after generation, in a desperate attempt to keep their divine bloodline pure. What had begun as a superstition turned into law, then into an iron cage from which no one could escape. Cousin married cousin. Uncle took niece. At times, even siblings were wed beneath the temple's altar, their union celebrated as holy. The result was an empire ruled by a family with unmatched wealth and power, and a bloodline slowly rotting from within. King Aratha himself was a product of this rotting tree. His gait was uneven, his body prone to seizures that left him trembling and half-conscious for hours. His mind, once sharp, had begun to unravel in recent years, given to paranoia and wild fits of rage. Now, all his hopes were pinned on the child struggling to be born inside that chamber. "Again!" the midwife commanded. "Push, my queen!" Serenya's screams rose to a crescendo. With a final, violent convulsion, a tiny, slick body emerged into the midwife's trembling hands. The chamber fell into a tense, unnatural silence. Even Serenya's gasping breaths seemed to halt. The midwife stared down at the newborn, her face blanching as though she had seen a demon crawl out of the womb. The child's head was enormous, far too large for its frail body. Its limbs were twisted, the fingers oddly fused. Its skin was pale to the point of translucence, the veins beneath visible like dark rivers. And the mouth, gods above, the mouth. The lower jaw jutted forward in a grotesque parody of a human face, the tongue lolling helplessly. Serenya turned her head weakly. My son," she rasped. The midwife hesitated. "Yes, your majesty." Son." From outside came the king's voice, a thunderous roar. "Open the doors! Let me see the heir!" The attendants scrambled to obey. The great ironwood doors groaned open, and King Aratha stormed inside. His eyes fell upon the child, and for one fleeting moment, even he flinched. But then his expression hardened. "He lives," Aratha declared. "That is all that matters." Serenya reached out a trembling hand. "Aratha, please, there's something wrong with him." "Silence!" Aratha snapped. "He is our son and the future of the Empire. His form is proof of our divine blood, nothing more." The courtiers echoed in unison, "Long live Prince Kael Drenloch!" But as they chanted, many dared not meet each other's eyes. For they all knew the truth, this was no divine blessing. It was the birth of a monster, and perhaps the final nail in the coffin of a dynasty that had once ruled the world. Section 2. The announcement of Prince Kael's birth echoed through the city of Valen before dawn had fully broken. Bells rang from the spires of the Temple of the Crimson Crown, and heralds rode through the streets shouting, "An heir is born! The blood of the gods flows on! Long live the prince! Long live House Drenloch!" The common folk cheered because they had been taught to cheer. They raised cups of watered wine and muttered prayers of gratitude, but behind their smiles lurked unease. Whispers spread quickly in the crowded taverns and shadowed alleyways. Why had the bells sounded so late into the night? Why had no glimpse of the infant been shown to the public? Old women clutched charms against the evil eye, muttering, "The blood is too strong. The gods do not bless what men have twisted." Inside the obsidian palace, the mood was far darker. The midwife carefully wrapped the newborn prince in silken cloth, hiding as much of his deformities as she could, while the queen lay pale and unmoving on the bed. Her breath came shallow and ragged. "Leave me with him," Serenya whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, just a moment with my child." The attendants glanced at King Aratha. His eyes, cold and pitiless, narrowed in thought. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "One moment. Then he goes to the priestesses for blessing." When the chamber cleared, Serenya cradled her son with trembling arms. "Oh, Kael," she murmured, tears streaking her cheeks. The infant's cloudy gray eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and strangely vacant. His mouth opened, releasing a wet, guttural sound. "You are my light," she whispered, though terror gripped her heart. "No matter what they say, you are mine." The door creaked open again, and Aratha entered, his heavy boots striking the marble floor like war drums. "Enough sentiment," he said, striding to her side. "The priests are waiting. The Empire must see strength, not weakness." Serenya's arms tightened around the child. "He's so small, Aratha. And there's something wrong." Aratha's hand shot out, gripping her chin with cruel force. "There is nothing wrong with my heir. Do you hear me, Serenya? The boy is perfect because he carries the blood of gods, untainted by outsiders. That is why we rule, why all others kneel." Her tears spilled freely, but she dared not speak. Aratha turned, barking at the guards outside. "Bring the priests! Begin the blessing rites!" As they obeyed, one of the older chambermaids whispered to another, "He looks, not like a prince, but like a curse given flesh." The other maid crossed herself quickly. "Hush! Walls have ears, and tongues are cut for less." Far above the birthing chamber, in the council hall of the palace, the king's advisors gathered. The hall was vast and echoing, its black stone walls etched with murals of the Drenloch ancestors, faces stern and unyielding, each with the unmistakable forward-jutting jaw that marked the family line. High Chancellor Marinval, a gaunt man with sunken eyes, addressed the council. "My lords, we have our heir. The royal bloodline endures." His tone was triumphant, but his hands trembled slightly as he rested them on the table. Lord Cashin, master of the southern provinces, frowned. And at what cost, Chancellor? You did not see the Queen's suffering. Some say she will not live the week. Merrin's gaze was sharp. Queens are replaceable. Bloodlines are not. A ripple of unease passed through the council. It was an unspoken truth. Serenya had been chosen not for her mind, nor her beauty, but because her bloodline matched the king's like a mirror. She was his niece and thus, in the king's twisted view, an ideal vessel to produce a pure heir. Do you question the wisdom of the old ways, Lord Cashen? Merrin's voice cut like a blade. Cashen hesitated, then bowed his head. No, Chancellor. I simply worry for the stability of the realm. The people whisper. They remember the stillbirths, the children who died before their first year. As the lords murmured among themselves, a shadow fell across the room. King Arathur entered, flanked by 2 guards. His very presence silenced the council. Enough, he growled. The prince lives. That is all that matters. Speak no more of weakness or doubt. Merrin bowed deeply. Majesty, shall we prepare the proclamation for the provinces? Yes, Arathur said. But first, his pale eyes gleamed with a strange light. They must understand why House Drenloch stands above all others. Tell them the truth of our divine blood. Remind them of our history, of the gods' gift to our line. At that, Merrin hesitated. For he knew the history well, and he knew it was far darker than the king would ever admit. Still, he bowed again. As you command, Majesty. That night, as torches flickered along the palace battlements, Merrin sat alone in his private chambers, poring over dusty scrolls. The record stretched back 200 years, to the time of King Eredith the Unifier, the first Drenloch to rule over all the western realms. Merrin's hands shook as he traced the names, the marriages, the births. Cousin to cousin, he muttered, voice bitter. Uncle to niece. Over and over. They've twisted the branches of their family tree into a noose. The inked names blurred as memories surfaced. He had been a young scribe when Arathur himself was born. Another difficult birth, another child with the telltale jaw and pale, watery eyes. Even then, the whispers had begun, the bloodline cannot hold forever. He turned to the final page, blank but for one fresh inscription, Kael Drenloch, heir apparent. The ink was still wet. Merrin closed his eyes, whispering to the empty room. May the gods forgive us for what we've done. Section 3. The legend of House Drenloch began long before the birth of Prince Kael, long before even the reign of King Arathur IV. To understand the monstrous child born in the Obsidian Palace, one must travel back through the tangled corridors of history, to the age of King Eredith the Unifier, the man whose ambition lit the first spark of this dynasty's rise and downfall. 2 centuries earlier, the Western realms were a fractured land, plagued by warring clans and crumbling city-states. The continent's heartlands were rich with silver mines, forests of blackwood, and vast fertile plains, and every petty king fought to control them. In this chaos rose Eredith of Drenloch, a warlord with a gift for strategy and a charisma that bent men to his will. Eredith claimed divine ancestry, declaring that his blood carried the power of Valor, the ancient god of storms and kings. Others may rule by might, he proclaimed to his warband, but I rule by right. My veins flow with the fire of the heavens. None shall question my claim. Through brilliant campaigns, he crushed his rivals and forged an empire that stretched from the icy northern fjords to the sun-scorched southern deserts. When he rode through conquered cities, people threw flowers at his feet, while whispering prayers, half in awe, half in fear. But Eredith was not content with territory alone. No blade can cut my line, he told his council on the night of his coronation. No foreign hand shall mix with the blood of the gods. Our dynasty will remain unbroken, pure as the day Valor descended to earth. His advisors exchanged uneasy glances. Even then, some understood the danger of his decree. Yet none dared oppose him. Eredith began the tradition of marrying within the family, first wedding his cousin, Lady Isolde, in a lavish ceremony that stunned the realm. The union was celebrated as sacred, a joining of god blood with god blood. At first, the results seemed miraculous. Their children were strong, intelligent, and fierce. The empire flourished under Arethus's iron rule, and the people came to believe the myth that purity of blood brought divine favor. But beneath the glittering surface, shadows gathered. Decades passed. Arethus's children followed his example, marrying cousins and nieces to preserve their divine essence. When Arethus died at the age of 70, his eldest son, King Veilric, took the throne. Veilric's jaw was noticeably more pronounced than his father's, but the priests declared it a mark of divinity. Under Veilric, the empire grew wealthier, but strange whispers began to circulate. Children of the royal house were stillborn at an increasing rate. Some who lived were sickly or mentally slow. Priests dismissed these concerns as blasphemy. Every drop of blood shed on the battlefield strengthens our line, they preached. Every union between kin brings us closer to the gods. A few bold scholars, like Helamar the chronicler, dared to write otherwise. Helamar's secret scrolls described patterns of illness, deformity, and madness among the royal family. He wrote of a curse of the closed circle, warning that a tree which bends inward will one day strangle itself. His work was discovered. Helamar was executed by fire in the public square, and his writings were burned with him. Only fragments survived, hidden by sympathetic scribes. 100 years later, the effects of Arethus's decree could no longer be denied. The royal portraits lining the palace hallways told the tale in silent testimony. Early kings bore noble, striking features. Later generations showed the gradual emergence of the Drenloch jaw, a grotesque jutting mandible that warped speech and made eating difficult. Under King Malric III, the deformity reached shocking levels. His portraits depicted a man whose face seemed half animal, half human. Malric rarely appeared in public, preferring to speak through masked emissaries. During one rare court appearance, a visiting diplomat from the northern realms whispered, "It is like gazing upon a relic of some ancient beast." The words were overheard. The diplomat was found dead the next morning, throat slit. It was under Malric's rule that the empire's enemies began to rise again. The once mighty armies of Drenloch faltered, their commanders distracted by court intrigue and paranoia. Malric himself descended into madness, obsessed with visions of divine judgment. He would spend hours clawing at his reflection in mirrors, screaming, "Unclean! They are all unclean!" On his deathbed, Malric summoned his council and his only surviving son, a boy of 16 named Tereth. "Keep it pure," Malric rasped, his malformed lips struggling to form words. "Promise me, Tereth. No outsiders. No corruption." Tereth, terrified and weeping, swore the oath. It would be the last decision he ever truly made for himself. The centuries that followed saw the Drenloch rulers tightening their grip on the bloodline with terrifying precision. Marriage negotiations became acts of war in their own right. Generals and governors were chosen not for loyalty or skill, but for their lineage. The royal family became a closed circle, intermarrying until the family tree was less a branching oak and more a serpent devouring its own tail. By the time of King Arathor's birth, the Drenloch line was a fragile shell of its former self. The empire still stretched across vast territories, but rebellions simmered in the provinces. Tax coffers ran dry. And in the palace, the family whispered behind locked doors, knowing that their legacy was crumbling. In the present, Marin Val rolled up the scroll containing these dark histories, his hands trembling. "This is what we have wrought," he murmured. A knock came at his chamber door. "Chancellor," a voice called. "The king commands your presence. The prince is to be shown to the people at dawn." Marin's heart sank. Shown? He had seen the child's twisted body with his own eyes. As he donned his ceremonial robe, he whispered to himself, "May the gods forgive me! The world will not." Section 4. The following dawn painted the skies above Valen in hues of crimson and gold, a deceptive beauty that masked the storm brewing beneath the empire's surface. The grand plaza of Ascension, normally bustling with merchants and pilgrims, had been cleared of commoners save for a tightly controlled crowd of citizens selected by the palace guard. Thousands gathered, packed shoulder to shoulder behind iron barricades. Soldiers with halberds stood in rigid rows, their armor gleaming like silver fire. Priests from the Temple of the Crimson Crown burned incense until the air was so thick and sweet that it clung to the back of the throat. Whispers passed through the crowd like ripples over still water. "Have you heard what they say of the child? That he was born with eyes like a fish. No, no, his jaw hangs so low he cannot close his mouth. Lies, all lies. The blood of the gods is flawless." A gray-haired woman spat on the ground. "Flawless blood doesn't kill a queen birthing it." The murmurs died instantly when the horns sounded, a deep, resonant call that reverberated through the plaza and set every heart pounding. The palace gates swung open with ponderous grace, and a procession emerged, banners of black and scarlet snapping in the morning breeze, trumpeters in gold-threaded cloaks, and finally, King Arather himself. Arather cut an imposing figure despite the stiffness of his gait. His ceremonial crown, forged from black iron and rubies, glimmered beneath the sun. His jaw jutted prominently, his speech forever thickened by his deformity, but his voice carried like a war drum as he addressed the crowd. "People of Drenloch," he roared, "behold the continuation of our divine line!" Gasps surged through the assembly as attendants brought forth an ornate cradle carved from obsidian. Inside lay Prince Kael, swaddled in silk embroidered with the sigil of a coiled serpent. From a distance, the bundle might have seemed like any other infant. But those in the front rows saw the truth. A woman in the crowd stifled a scream. Kael's head was grotesquely enlarged, the veins beneath his pallid skin throbbing visibly. His mouth hung slack, tongue protruding slightly. The strange, cloudy gray of his eyes gave him the vacant look of a blind child. His tiny hands twitched in irregular spasms. The high priestess of the temple stepped forward, her face carefully neutral. She raised her arms to the sky. "Valor has blessed us with this heir. The blood of the gods remains pure. Long live Prince Kael!" The crowd hesitated, a ripple of uncertainty passing through them. Soldiers gripped their weapons more tightly. "Long live Prince Kael!" A few voices echoed, wavering. Arather's gaze swept the plaza like a blade. "Long live the prince!" he thundered again, his tone a command, not a celebration. This time, thousands of voices joined, fear overtaking doubt. "Long live Prince Kael! Long live House Drenloch!" The priests began a blessing ritual, their chanting low and rhythmic. Marenval stood just behind the king, his face pale and drawn. He saw not a divine heir, but the culmination of 2 centuries of mistakes. When the ceremony ended, Arather returned to the palace, triumphant. In the privacy of the throne chamber, he turned to his council. "Let the world see strength," he commanded. "Send word to the provinces. Any who speak ill of the prince are traitors to the crown." Maren hesitated. "Majesty, some of the provinces already rebel. The people are hungry. The harvest was poor this year and—" Arather's fist slammed down on the throne's armrest. "They will bow, or they will burn. Do you think our line has survived centuries of enemies only to fall to a mob of farmers?" Lord Cashin cleared his throat, his face carefully neutral. "Majesty, with respect, the rebellion in the western marches grows by the day. Some nobles whisper that a marriage alliance with a foreign house could—" Arather's eyes blazed. "Never! Our blood is pure because it is unbroken. No foreign taint shall ever mingle with the line of Valor." His voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "Would you see us become like the rabble? Deluded? Common?" "No, Majesty," Cashin said quickly, bowing. But inwardly his thoughts churned. He had seen the infant's twisted form. He had heard the priests murmuring prayers they dared not voice aloud. If this is the price of purity, Cashin thought grimly, then the Empire is doomed. That night, Serenya awoke alone in her chamber. Her body ached from the birth, her mind clouded by grief and dread. She turned her head to the cradle beside her bed. Kael lay there, silent and unmoving except for shallow, irregular breaths. "My poor child," she whispered, brushing a trembling finger against his swollen forehead. "What have they done to you?" Tears streamed down her face. She had been raised to believe the royal bloodline was sacred, but now, seeing her son suffering, she could no longer accept the lie. A soft voice spoke from the shadows. "My queen!" Serenya startled. A figure stepped forward, an older woman, the palace healer, cloaked in gray. "My queen," the healer said again, bowing. "Forgive my intrusion, but you must hear me." Serenya wiped her tears. "What is it?" The healer's voice dropped to a whisper. "The prince's condition, it is not divine. It is the result of too much closeness in the blood." Serenya frowned. "You mean the marriages?" The healer nodded grimly. "Generations of cousin to cousin, uncle to niece, the blood has turned upon itself. It is breaking. If this continues, there will be no strong heirs left." Serenya's breath caught. "Then we must tell the king." "No!" The healer's face went pale with fear. "To question the old ways is treason. I risk death even speaking to you. But there may still be hope if—" The door burst open. Guards flooded in, led by Marin Val. His expression was unreadable. "Remove her," Marin ordered. "And speak no more of this." The healer was dragged away, screaming. Serenya clutched her son protectively, her heart pounding. As Marin closed the door, he met the queen's gaze. "For your sake, and for the realm, forget what she said." But Serenya could not forget. That night, as she held Kael close, a seed of rebellion took root in her heart. Section 5. The days following Kael's presentation to the people were filled with pageantry and celebration, carefully orchestrated by King Arather and his council. Public feasts were held in every major city. Priests proclaimed that the infant prince was a living miracle, the embodiment of divine favor. Statues were draped in crimson banners, and soldiers paraded through the streets with the empire's sigil proudly displayed. But beneath the forced festivities, unrest festered. In the western marches, where fields lay barren and villages starved, whispers of rebellion grew louder. Farmers cursed the crown's taxes while burying their children in shallow graves. In the taverns of Arindril, a rugged port city, drunken sailors muttered dangerous words. "The king's blood may be pure, but his stomach isn't empty like ours. I heard the prince was born twisted, a sign the gods have turned their backs. Enough of this madness. Let the provinces rule themselves." The royal spies sent reports of these conversations back to Valen, but Arather dismissed them with a wave of his hand. "Let the peasants bark like dogs," he sneered during a council session. "Their teeth cannot pierce the throne." Marin Val, standing at the king's right hand, forced himself to bow. "Majesty, with respect, the marches are more than peasants. Several noble houses there have joined the unrest. If they unite, they could field an army." Arather's jaw clenched so tightly that his malformed teeth ground audibly. "Then we will crush them. I will not dilute our bloodline with alliances. I will drown them in their own." The hall fell silent. Lord Cashin exchanged a tense glance with Marin. Even those who still supported Arather's vision could see the truth: their king was unraveling. Meanwhile, in the secluded chambers of the royal nursery, Queen Serenya lived in a world of shadows and secrets. Kael was 3 months old and had yet to cry like a normal child. His noises were low, guttural grunts that sent shivers down Serenya's spine. He rarely opened his eyes, and when he did, they rolled unnaturally in their sockets. His limbs twitched at odd angles, as though he were a marionette pulled by clumsy strings. Every day, Serenya begged the palace physicians for answers. "Is he in pain? Can anything be done for him?" The chief physician, a timid man named Orville, avoided her gaze. "Majesty, the prince's condition is beyond our skill. The gods alone know his fate." Serenya's grief grew heavier with each passing week. At night she sang lullabies to Kael, her voice trembling. "You are mine, little one," she whispered, cradling him close. "No matter what they say, no matter how they look at you, you are my son." But when she looked into his cloudy gray eyes, she sometimes wondered if he understood her words at all. One rainy evening, Serenya received a secret visitor. Lady Elora, her childhood friend and now one of her handmaidens, slipped into the chamber with a bundle of parchment hidden beneath her cloak. "My queen," Elora whispered urgently, "I have learned something terrible." Serenya's heart raced. "Speak quickly." Elora spread the parchments on the bed. They were genealogical records, detailed charts of House Drenloch's marriages going back centuries. Names and dates spiraled inward like a tightening snare. "Look," Elora urged, pointing to a cluster of names. "This is you. This is His Majesty. Your union is not just uncle and niece. You share blood through 3 other lines as well. It is unnatural." Serenya stared at the charts, horror dawning in her eyes. "This is why the healer spoke of the blood turning on itself," she whispered. "Kael was doomed before he was even conceived." "There is more," Elora said, her voice shaking. "The healer who tried to warn you, she was executed last night. They said it was for spreading treason, but I heard the guards whisper. She begged to see you before the end." Serenya clutched Kael to her chest, fury burning through her grief. "My son suffers because of their madness. I will not let him be their sacrifice." Elora's eyes filled with tears. "What will you do, Serenya? If the king learns you speak this way, he will kill you." Serenya looked down at her sleeping child, her jaw set with resolve. "Then I will speak carefully. But I will find a way to save him, and perhaps save the realm." The next morning, Serenya took her first step into treachery. During the royal breakfast, she broached the subject cautiously. "My lord husband," she said sweetly, "have you considered strengthening our alliances through marriage with foreign houses? It might bring stability to the provinces." Arathar's fork clattered against his plate. "Never," he snarled, his lips curling grotesquely. "The moment a drop of foreign blood mingles with ours, the gods will abandon us." Serenya lowered her gaze demurely, hiding her anger. "Of course, Majesty. Forgive me. I only wish for peace." Arathar grunted, appeased by her submission. But Marinval, watching from across the table, saw the flash of defiance in Serenya's eyes. That night, Marin sent a discreet message to his network of spies. "Watch the queen closely. If she plots against the throne, we must act swiftly." Far from the palace, rebellion finally erupted into open war. In the western marches, a coalition of noble houses declared independence, raising a banner of black and silver. Their leader, Lord Darius Velthane, was a charismatic warrior who claimed descent from one of the old clans crushed by Erithus the Unifier centuries ago. "The Drenloch blood is cursed," Darius declared before a roaring crowd. "While they feast in their black palace, our children starve. Today we cast off their chains." His army marched on the provincial capital, seizing grain stores and driving out the royal garrison. When news of this reached Valen, King Arathar's rage was terrible to behold. "Burn their cities," he roared, veins bulging in his neck. "Salt their fields. Let the ashes of their rebellion be a warning to all." Even Marin paled at the king's fury. "Majesty, we must consider strategy." "No more words," Arathar bellowed. "I will lead the army myself. The blood of Valor does not hide behind walls." The court erupted into chaos as preparations for war began. Serenya watched silently, clutching Kael close. She knew that if Arathar fell in battle, the empire would crumble, and her son would inherit a throne built on corpses. And so, as the drums of war thundered, the queen began to weave her own plans in secret, a fragile hope blooming in the darkness. Section 6. The thunder of war drums reverberated through the streets of Valen as King Arathar's army prepared to march. Columns of soldiers in black and scarlet armor filled the avenues, their boots striking in perfect rhythm. Horses snorted and pawed the cobblestones, their breath rising like mist in the chill dawn air. Siege engines creaked as they rolled through the city gates, grim harbingers of destruction. From her balcony, Queen Serenya watched the departure with a heavy heart. Kael lay in her arms, swaddled tightly against the cold. His pale, oversized head rested awkwardly on her shoulder, and his shallow breaths rattled faintly in his throat. Your father goes to bathe the realm in blood, she whispered bitterly. And one day, they will demand the same of you. Lady Elora stood beside her, glancing nervously at the bustling courtyard below. If the king wins quickly, perhaps stability will return, she offered, though her voice lacked conviction. Serenya turned to her friend, eyes blazing. There will be no stability, Elora. Even if he crushes the rebellion, another will rise. They cannot see it yet, but the true enemy is not in the western marches, it is here. She placed a trembling hand over her son's chest. In this palace. In this cursed bloodline. Below, Aratha mounted his massive black warhorse, Valar's Wrath, named for the god he claimed as ancestor. His towering figure radiated power, though his movements were stiff from the seizures that increasingly plagued him. People of Drenloch! He roared, his deformed jaw working hard to form the words. Your king rides to war! By my blood and by the gods, we shall crush these traitors! The crowd roared back, though the cheers were tinged with fear rather than devotion. Many remembered the sight of the infant prince at his presentation, and the whispers about curses and divine punishment had not faded. Aratha raised his sword high, the blade glinting crimson in the dawn light. For the blood, he thundered. For the blood, the soldiers echoed, a chilling battle cry. The gates opened, and the army surged forward, leaving the capital trembling in their wake. As the last of the soldiers disappeared into the horizon, Serenya turned away from the balcony. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set with determination. Now, she said to Elora, our true work begins. My queen, Elora whispered urgently. What you are suggesting is dangerous beyond imagining. If the king learns, he will not. Serenya interrupted sharply. Aratha has eyes only for war. While he is away, we must uncover the truth of our line before it destroys us completely. Elora swallowed. Where will we start? The temple archives, Serenya said. The priests have records older than the palace itself. Somewhere within those scrolls lies the proof that our so-called divine blood is nothing more than rot and madness. Elora paled. The high priestess would never allow us to see such records. Serenya's lips curled in a humorless smile. Then we shall not ask her permission. That night, Serenya disguised herself in a plain gray cloak and slipped through a hidden passage beneath the palace. Elora followed, carrying a single lantern that cast long, flickering shadows on the stone walls. The passage led to a forgotten tunnel beneath the Temple of the Crimson Crown, a place where even priests rarely ventured. They emerged into a narrow hallway lined with statues of ancient kings, their faces stern and unyielding. The temple was silent save for the faint hum of chanting above. Serenya led the way to a heavy iron door. It bore the sigil of the coiled serpent and the inscription, Blood eternal, unbroken, divine. Elora shivered. This is it. The forbidden archives. Serenya pressed her hands to the door, whispering a prayer, not to Valar, but to any gods who might still listen. If there is truth within, let me find it. The lock yielded with a soft click. Together, they slipped inside. The chamber beyond was vast, filled with shelves that stretched into darkness. Scrolls and tomes lay piled high, some so ancient they crumbled at a touch. The air smelled of dust and incense, with an undertone of something metallic and unpleasant, like old blood. Serenya moved quickly, scanning the markings on each scroll. Look for records of royal marriages. Anything that shows the family lines. Hours passed as they worked in silence, the only sounds the rustle of parchment and the scratching of rats in the shadows. Finally, Elora gasped. My queen! Here! Serenya rushed to her side. Spread across the table was a massive genealogical chart, far more detailed than the one Elora had shown her before. It stretched back nearly 300 years, to the time of King Eredith the Unifier. The pattern was unmistakable. Cousin to cousin. Uncle to niece. Over and over, the same names intertwined until they formed a knot of madness. Serenya's hands trembled as she traced the lines leading to her own name, and to Kael's. It is worse than I imagined, she whispered. Aratha and I share more than half our blood. Kael is the culmination of centuries of this. Elora pointed to a symbol near the top of the chart. Look here, my queen. The priests marked certain unions with this sign. Serenya's brow furrowed. What does it mean? Before Elora could answer, a cold voice echoed through the chamber. It means you have seen too much. They spun around to find High Priestess Myrrhen standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 temple guards. Her crimson robes glimmered in the lantern light, her eyes sharp as knives. My queen, Myrrhen said smoothly, your curiosity has led you astray. These records are sacred, meant only for the chosen. Serenya stepped forward, fury overcoming her fear. Sacred? This is a record of lies and decay. You have known all along, haven't you? You and the priests have watched our bloodline rot while preaching divinity to the people. Myrrhen's expression did not change. The people need faith, not truth. Without the illusion of purity, the empire would collapse. Then perhaps it should collapse. Serenya hissed. Better to rebuild than to continue this madness. The priestess's smile was thin and cruel. Spoken like a traitor. She raised her hand. Seize them. The guards advanced, swords drawn. Serenya clutched Elora's arm, her mind racing. She had come seeking answers, but now she faced death, or worse, silence at the hands of those who had protected the lie for generations. Section 7. The temple guards closed in, their black and scarlet armor glinting in the flickering lantern light. Serenya's breath came quick and shallow as she backed toward the shelves, clutching Elora's arm. The narrow chamber left little room to maneuver. My queen, Elora whispered frantically. We must run! There's nowhere to go. Serenya hissed. Her eyes darted to the iron door behind the priestess. Too far. Even if they reached it, the guards would cut them down before they could escape. High Priestess Myrrhen stepped forward, her crimson robes whispering across the stone floor. Her voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge beneath it. Your Majesty, do not resist. I will tell the people that you came here seeking blessings for the prince's health. No one need know of this mistake. Mistake? Serenya's voice cracked like a whip. She pointed to the sprawling genealogical chart behind her. You've known for centuries. You've watched us destroy ourselves while you preach purity and obedience. My son is suffering because of this vile deception. Myrrhen's cold smile did not waver. Your son is the embodiment of our faith. His suffering is the price of divine power. Rage overtook Serenya's fear. No, Myrrhen. His suffering is the price of your lies. The guards lunged forward. Elora screamed as one swung his blade, narrowly missing her. Serenya snatched up the lantern and hurled it at the nearest shelf. Glass shattered, and oil splashed across the scrolls. Flames roared to life, leaping hungrily up the dry parchment. Stop them! Myrrhen shrieked, her composure breaking at last. The guards hesitated, torn between seizing the queen and saving the sacred archives. Serenya seized the moment. Run! She shouted to Elora. They darted between the shelves as smoke filled the chamber. The fire spread with terrifying speed, devouring centuries of carefully hidden history. Serenya's lungs burned as she ran, coughing and gasping. Behind them, Myrrhen's furious voice echoed through the smoke. Find them! Do not let them escape! Elora stumbled, nearly falling, but Serenya dragged her onward. At last they burst through a side passage into the cold night air. The temple bells began to ring in alarm as acolytes rushed to contain the blaze. Serenya and Elora didn't dare pause to watch. They fled through the shadowed alleys of Valen, their cloaks pulled tightly around them. When they finally reached the hidden passage beneath the palace, Serenya collapsed against the wall, trembling. Did we lose them? Elora gasped. For now, Serenya panted. She clutched a single scrap of parchment tightly in her fist, the only piece of the genealogical chart she had managed to tear free before the fire consumed the rest. We have proof, she said hoarsely. Not enough to convince the court, but enough to know the truth. Elora stared at her with wide, frightened eyes. And what will you do with it, my queen? If the king returns and learns of this. Serenya looked down at the crumpled parchment, then at her son's distant sleeping chambers. I will protect Kael, she said fiercely. Even if it means defying Aratha himself. While Serenya plotted in secret, far from Valen, King Aratha waged his brutal campaign against the Western Rebellion. The rebel leader, Lord Darius Velthane, had proven a cunning foe. His forces struck swiftly, using knowledge of the rugged terrain to outmaneuver the royal army. Villages were turned into fortresses, roads sabotaged, supply lines severed. In his command tent, Aratha raged at his generals. Cowards and fools! He bellowed, his twisted jaw making the words thick and wet. You let peasants toy with the blood of kings! One general, a young noble named Kareth, dared to speak. Majesty, the enemy's tactics are unlike any we have faced. Perhaps we should consider. Aratha's sword flashed in the firelight. A heartbeat later, Karetha's head rolled across the tent floor. Consider nothing! Aratha roared. We will burn their lands until nothing remains but ash! The remaining generals fell to their knees, trembling. None dared to question him again. As Aratha's army marched deeper into rebel territory, atrocities multiplied. Entire villages were set aflame. Men were executed, women and children taken as hostages. Survivors were forced to kneel before Aratha's banner and swear loyalty, or die. Lord Darius, however, refused to break. From the stronghold of Iron Spire Keep, he rallied his forces and issued a proclamation to the realm. House Drenloch's divine blood is a lie, he declared to his gathered warriors. Their purity is rot. Their prince is no heir of the gods, but a monster born of madness. Rise with me, and we shall cast down the tyrants who rule by deceit. Copies of his words, written on rough parchment, spread like wildfire through the provinces. The people, already restless, began to openly question the throne's legitimacy. Back in Valen, Serenya's worst fears were confirmed when a group of palace guards intercepted her during an evening walk in the gardens. Their leader bowed stiffly. Forgive us, Majesty. By order of Chancellor Marinval, no one may leave the inner palace without escort. Serenya forced a calm smile. And why is that? The guard hesitated. There have been rumors, Majesty. Rumors that certain individuals seek to harm the prince. The words were a thin veil over the truth. Serenya understood immediately. Marin suspected her. When she returned to her chambers, she found Elora waiting with terrible news. My queen, Elora whispered. One of our allies in the kitchens overheard a conversation between Marin and the High Priestess. They plan to keep Kael under constant watch. And if his condition worsens, they will claim it is a sign of divine will and... Her voice faltered. And kill him, Serenya finished, her heart turning to ice. Elora nodded, tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry. Serenya gathered her sleeping son into her arms. His breath was shallow, his skin clammy. They will not touch him, she swore. I will see to it that my son lives, even if I must tear down the throne itself. Meanwhile, the temple fire had spread throughout the city. Though the main archives were saved, many priceless records were lost. Publicly, Marin blamed the blaze on careless acolytes. Privately, she seethed. The queen has defied us, she told Marin in a hushed meeting within the palace crypts. She must be silenced before her poison spreads. Marin's face was pale. Majesty or not, if the people believe her claims, the entire empire will unravel. But killing her outright will make her a martyr. Then we will be subtle, Marin said with a cold smile. An unfortunate illness, perhaps. Or a tragic fall. Let the king return to find his queen dead and his enemies in disarray. Marin swallowed hard. Even after years of navigating court politics, he had never felt so trapped. Marin's plan was dangerous, but the alternative, the exposure of the royal bloodline's corruption, was unthinkable. Do what you must, he said finally. But do it quickly. The future of Drenloch depends on it. Section 8, The Fall. The moon hung low and pale over the obsidian palace, casting the towers and spires in ghostly silver. In the quiet of her private chambers, Serenya paced like a caged animal, clutching Kael to her chest. His breathing was ragged, his tiny limbs twitching in painful spasms. "They will not take you," she whispered fiercely to her son. "Not while I still draw a breath." Lady Elora watched from the shadows, her face lined with exhaustion and fear. "My queen," she said urgently, "the assassins will strike soon. I bribed one of the palace guards to open the eastern gate at midnight. You must flee tonight." Serenya shook her head, trembling. "If I run, they will call me a traitor and hunt me across the realm. Kael will never be safe." "He will never be safe here either," Elora insisted. "Meryn and the High Priestess will kill him the moment they have the chance." Serenya's eyes filled with tears. "Arather, if he returns to find me gone." Elora's grip on her arm tightened. "Arather may never return. The war is going badly. Reports say Lord Darius's army has grown threefold. If the king falls, the entire empire will collapse into chaos." For a long moment, Serenya said nothing. Then, with a trembling breath, she nodded. "Very well. Tonight we flee." Far from Valen, the rebellion reached its climax at Ironspire Keep. Arathar's army surrounded the rebel stronghold, siege engines pounding the ancient walls. Smoke filled the air, mingling with the stench of blood and sweat. Inside his command tent, Arathar raged like a wounded beast. His seizures had worsened, leaving him pale and trembling, but his fury burned brighter than ever. "Darius will kneel," he snarled. "I will cut out his tongue and parade his corpse through the capital." But as dawn broke, a messenger burst into the tent with devastating news. A second rebel army had struck their rear lines. "They knew we were coming," the messenger cried. "We are surrounded." Arathar's eyes went wide with disbelief. For the first time in his life, fear cracked through his mask of divine certainty. "No," he whispered. "The blood of Valar cannot fall to rabble." But the tide of battle was unstoppable. By nightfall, the royal army was shattered. Arathar himself was dragged from his horse, bleeding and delirious. Lord Darius stood over him, sword raised high. "The age of Drenloch ends tonight," Darius shouted. With a single, decisive strike, the so-called divine king was no more. In Valen, news of Arathar's death reached the palace like a thunderclap. Chaos erupted as rival factions vied for power. Meryn convened the council, his voice hoarse with desperation. "We must crown the prince immediately," he urged. "Even in his infancy, Kael's presence will unify the realm." "Unify?" Lord Cashin spat. "The people whisper that the prince is cursed. The rebellion will only grow stronger if we parade that creature before them." The council dissolved into shouting. Hidden behind a tapestry, Serenya listened to their arguments, her heart pounding. She clutched the scrap of parchment she had saved from the temple fire, the only surviving proof of the bloodline's corruption. "They will never see him as a boy," she whispered to Elora. "Only as a symbol. A weapon. I will not let them use him." That night, Serenya and Elora crept through the darkened palace. Kael lay silent in Serenya's arms, his breathing shallow but steady. The corridors were eerily empty. Most guards had been sent to quell riots in the city. At the eastern gate, a lone guard awaited them, shifting nervously. "Hurry, Majesty," he whispered, "before anyone notices you're gone." But as they approached, a cold, mocking voice rang out. "Leaving so soon, my queen?" High Priestess Meryn stepped from the shadows, flanked by her personal guards. Her crimson robes seemed to glow in the moonlight. "You cannot flee destiny," she said, her smile thin and cruel. "The child is ours. He will rule or he will die." Serenya's grip on Kael tightened. "Over my dead body." "So be it," Meryn hissed. "Kill them both." The courtyard erupted into chaos. Elora fought like a wildcat, snatching a fallen guard's dagger and slashing desperately. Serenya ran for the gate, clutching Kael, but a guard grabbed her cloak and yanked her back. "Go, Serenya!" Elora screamed. "Run!" "No!" Serenya cried, reaching for her friend. Elora smiled through her tears. Save him. That's all that matters. With a final, defiant cry, Elora hurled herself at Murren, tackling the priestess into the reflecting pool. Both women vanished beneath the crimson-stained water as Serenya fled into the night. Days later, Murren stood alone in the throne room. The city outside burned. The rebellion had reached the capital, and there was no sign of Serenya or the prince. As flames consumed the banners of House Drenloch, Murren sank to his knees before the empty throne. All our centuries of scheming, he whispered. All for nothing. The doors burst open, and Lord Darius strode in, flanked by his victorious soldiers. The false bloodline is broken, he declared. From this day forth, the Empire belongs to the people. Murren bowed his head, tears streaking his face. He knew it was over. Far from the burning city, Serenya trudged through a forest path, her cloak ragged, her body bruised and weary. Kael stirred weakly in her arms, his gray eyes flickering open. You will live, she whispered fiercely. Not as a king, not as a symbol, but as my son. You will be free of their chains. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger. But for the first time since his birth, Serenya felt a fragile thread of hope. Behind her, the empire crumbled. Ahead of her, a new life waited, one where the blood of gods would mean nothing at all.